Good morning, speech crafters, and perhaps some of our members of Teen Toastmasters Club. My name is Sabrina. Saya sebenarnya adalah anggota dari Klub Bahasa Indonesia Jakarta Bahasa Toastmasters Club. Tetapi sebelumnya saya juga pernah menjadi anggota dari Klub Toastmasters berbahasa Inggris lain, yakni Universitas Indonesia Toastmasters Club dan Eternal Toastmasters Club. But since I think today we are going to have this meeting in English, I will also deliver this topic in English. Now, first of all, let me just try to share my screen and let me know if you can actually see it by now. Can you see it?
Yes.
Can you reaction? Okay, nice. Today we are going to start, actually we are going to talk about the purpose of a speech. Now, when Bu Rona or Distinguished Toastmaster Rona approached me to talk about one of these topics, I realized that the previous weeks you have talked about speech organization and choosing your topics. Now we are going to talk about something a little bit bigger, but it will also somehow emphasize on more specific parts later on that are still related to the previous two topics that you have already received. So start with the purpose. And this is a very random quote from the internet. Someone said that if you have a purpose in life, you don't have to be pushed. Your passion will drive you there. And I believe that when it comes to speech or public speaking, it is the same exact thing, which means when you actually have in mind the purpose of your speech, the purpose of what you are going to deliver, then that means the later parts in your speech will just run very smoothly. Well, maybe not that smooth, but you get a picture. We always need to start with the purpose itself first, because maybe when we are being asked to deliver a speech in front of our colleagues about specific topic, then we know the purpose is first, perhaps to inform, and then second, there's a specific statement that we have in mind that describes what our purpose is going to be. And then perhaps we'll go specific on the topics like in the previous week, and then we'll go to the details such as organizing the speech itself. But yes, everything needs to start with a strong purpose first, because with a strong purpose, we can solidify later on the other parts of the speech itself. And if you actually read the topic or the manual, I believe, since I have never actually seen the manual of speechcraft, generally people classify speech purpose into 4 categories: to inform, or to let the audience know about something that's been going on, or maybe new insights; or second, to persuade. Maybe it's not just enough sufficient to inform, but you also want to put forward an idea to encourage people to buy your products, or to encourage your colleagues to actually do something or achieve something to get people to accept your ideas. It's not enough to inform. Or sometimes, depending on the context, maybe you just simply want to entertain. You do not want to persuade an audience to go to certain political beliefs, but you just want to make the audience laugh, and that is perfectly fine. Or sometimes you want to inspire the audience with your personal stories, with your struggles, and a lot of times I see that it can be a combination of all of the things. Now, the question would be, and I get this quite a lot, is it possible to have more than one purpose in one speech? Actually, yes, it's very much possible, but my advice to you is to be careful, because with a very short minutes of speech, perhaps your speech will be 5 until 7 minutes. Then to have too many things or too many purposes in your speech will get the audience confused. What is he trying to propose to us? Is he actually trying to inform us, or is he trying to actually get us to laugh? The audience might get confused. So be mindful when you determine your general purpose of the speech. But yeah, so basically these are the four general main thing. Now, having a general purpose is good, but then to have a strong, solid thing in our mind, it will also be great to put that into just one sentence, one specific purpose. For example, I do not put this forward on my screen, but at one time I tried to come up with a speech for a Toastmasters contest. It was about me struggling in life, and I had the title on my mind. It was Run, Sabrina, Run, but the general purpose is to inspire. A little bit to entertain because that could be good for the flow, not so much to persuade. I don't think not at all to inform because mostly it was all about my personal stories, but mostly to inspire. I had that in my mind, but I also put the specific purpose in a form of one sentence to solidify my thinking. And in that case, my thinking was I want this speech to give an inspiration to the audience to know that they are not in a marathon in life, that they can just run or walk in their own pace. Something like that. So, fellow Toastmasters or soon to be Toastmasters, when you try to write a speech, come up with first general purpose. It can be a little bit of a combination of both or some of them, but just be mindful and consider the amount of time. And the second, try to put that in a sentence to solidify your thinking. And then what's next? Now, this is something that should have been thought in the previous session, but this is just a little bit of an information. There are several methods or several ways you can organize your speech. This should also be in the manual. First one is to have them in a chronological order. This would be perfect for a story. You start with the beginning. Maybe you try to tell the audience about your traveling experience, how it goes, and how entertaining it was. So you start with how you fly, and then you land on a new place, and all of those experiences. So chronological order, in a timely manner, something like that. It's a story. But another way is a topical. Maybe you have a main topic, and then you divide that into several topics. Another one is a spatial. You organize your speech by geography or physical structure of the topic. Maybe you, instead of talking about the experiences you have when you travel, you tell the audience when you travel, you go to different parts of, perhaps you go to Australia and then you start from the west, you start from the middle, and you start and then you end up with the eastern part, something like that. Spatial, it's quite literal. Or maybe a causal. the general the general topic or the general purpose is to inspire, or I think most likely this is to persuade the audience, perhaps to try to eat more vegetarian food. Then you try to put a cause and the effect of eating or consuming more vegetarian food, something like that. There is a cause and there's an effect, but it can also be the other way around. It might also be several of these following items. Comparative. We try to persuade again to the audience that one idea is actually better than the other idea. So we put the pros and the cons of every aspect. It can be a problem and a solution. One time for my speech contest, I tried to have a speech about how to make some changes. So I started with some problems when I travel and I see a lot of trashes, and then I go to the solution. But it can be a lot of things, or simply something general and then specific. But yes, these are several of the methods that you can have in your speech when you try to organize that. Now, after that, it's not just enough to actually come up with the purpose of your speech. How to write them down is also very important. Again, this is another topic that should have been touched in the previous session. However, this is also still very relevant. Every speech needs to have an opening or an introduction, and then it will have the body, which should be the longest part of the speech. It needs to have a summary, just to summarize or just to conclude what has been happening. Because unfortunately, nowadays, I think many of us just quick to forget about a lot of the things that were delivered to us. That's why it's important to put a summary before you close the speech. And then there is a closing. Introduction, some might say, is one of the most or essential things in a speech structure because that's the moment when you try to grab the audience attention. So some might say the first 15 seconds of a speech is essential. Try to come up with something interesting. It shouldn't just necessarily be you screaming to the audience. It can be an interesting story that might have the audience to, guess what the next point would be, or perhaps an enlightening quote, or maybe an anecdote, or maybe an act. Something that is not too heavy, but something that is interesting enough to have the audience by the edge of their seat. And then you come up with the body, the longest part of your speech. Now you can go to these 7 methods. You want to pick any of those, or you want to just combine some of those, that would be fine. You put a summary, don't forget, try to summarize again. What was the point or the initially, this should be mainly the purpose of your speech again. You put that again on your summary and then have a closing remark, something that is memorable for the audience to take back to their home. Usually this would be some sort of closings, a quotes, an empowering call to action statement that again emphasizes the purpose of your speech, especially the specific one, not the general one. But then again, there are still items to pay attention to. First one is the audience demographic. Now, you came up with a specific statement, but do you think the audience will understand before you even try to come up with the topics or the purpose? Try to understand the audience demographic itself. Am I going to face some speech crafters who mostly consist of young professionals or recently graduates? Because then the content and the purpose itself, or how you organize the speech itself, might also differ. So always try to see it and create it from the POV or the audience. And don't forget to always be specific, or the audience at the end of the day might be confused what you are trying to convince or what you're trying to sell to the audience. And still be realistic. Perhaps you want to convince an idea to the audience to do something, but it might be too big. And for the audience demographic, it's just not possible. So always try to pay attention of these 3 things. See who your audience is, and then write, also determine your purpose based on their demographic. Always try to be specific, concise, and then be realistic. By the end of the day, your speech, and this is actually also a personal taste, especially in Toastmasters, to always have a personal story. I get it. Sometimes in speech that is meant to inform, this might be less likely. However, you can also come up with perhaps an anecdote or another figure's inspirational stories, because the thing about stories is that it makes it easier for us to digest. Instead of numbers or factual data, put a story, however minimum that would be. That will always encourage the audience to understand more about your content. Okay, since the like is also already read, that's it from me. By the end of the day, I would like to encourage you to always not just come up with the general purpose, but also write it down in a specific sentence so that you can solidify your thinking and go from there. Thank you. Back to Toastmaster Atta.